this is a second wave now, do you believe?
Well, Peter, it's certainly a second surge. I'll let the medical experts describe it as they see fit. But obviously it's something that's concerning all of us around the country. But I am also confident that the measures we took a few months ago to crush the first wave can do so here again. There are some very extreme measures being taken, but I'm confident we can get that under control in the weeks ahead.
Is it right to shut the border between New South Wales and Victoria?
Well, look, I do think there has to be travel restrictions put in place in times like this. I don't know, obviously, regional Victoria as well as I do regional Queensland. But months ago, a number of us up here called for regional border closures, and I think it would have been better if more work could have been done on how that could happen, because it is patently unfair that some rural regional Victorian towns are now locked down effectively, or locked out from services in New South Wales. When they have no cases, there's no real issue in many of those towns. But look, if the work hasn't been done in regional Victoria to set up more regionally based travel restrictions, perhaps using the state borders is the only thing that can be done.
So you had been against the border closures in Queensland, right? So why would that be different this time around?
Oh, no, that's not true, Peter. I supported the border closures. I thought they could have been lifted a bit earlier than they have been. I think the Premier was a little slow, and I was also critical of the confusion that the Queensland government allowed to permeate the decision that was ultimately made. But no, I've been an advocate that there needs to be travel restrictions put in place when outbreaks occur. I do think, to some extent, there has been a more targeted approach within Melbourne here, with some lockdowns in suburbs by suburb basis, which is positive. But I would like to see, for those of us who live in country and rural areas, I'd like us to see and plan for a bit more of how we could impose restrictions on travel regionally, rather than just on the arbitrary state borders, which don't always, of course, line up with where the coronavirus cases are occurring.
So was Anastasia Palaszczuk right to hold on for as long as she did?
Look, I mean, Peter, I'm not going to make a big deal of this because it's quite equivocal now. It's done. But I do think she could have moved earlier. But, we're talking a matter of weeks here.
But doesn't this kind of justify her position?
Well, as I said, I supported the border closures in the first place. I think it was the right thing to do. I would have liked to have seen more travel restrictions put in place in Queensland at the time. But we've always got to respond to circumstances. That's the issue here. We're not going to eradicate the coronavirus. What we have to make sure is we're nimble enough to respond to issues as they arise. And I don't think the Queensland government were as nimble as they could have been in the last few months. But as I said, let's move on. The right decision's been made now. And I'm very, very thankful that the Queensland Premier didn't drag this out till September, as she was flagging a few weeks ago.
Where does this end, though, Matt? I mean, we've been told all along, you've got to open up the borders, you've got to get the economy going again, despite, spot fires that are going to emerge, these outbreaks that are going to emerge. Well, an outbreak has now emerged in Victoria and they're shutting the border again. So this kind of stop-start for the economy is going to continue. So where does this end going forward? Is there going to be more border shutdowns whenever another inevitable outbreak emerges?
Well, look, we're going to have to respond to circumstances as they arise. There's full support for the measures that have been taken. As I flagged earlier, I think it would be worthwhile us looking at sharper rather than blunter measures in response to local outbreaks.
What do you mean by that?
That is occurring.
What do you mean by that?
So that means more targeted lockdowns, more targeted restrictions on travel where the actual outbreaks are occurring. And as I'm saying, that is occurring. That is happening now in Melbourne, where it's not the whole Melbourne being locked down. It's those areas that outbreaks are occurring. But we could probably do more work on that, I think, certainly around the travel issues and where people go to and from, because that's the way of trying to keep as much of our economy open while we deal with individual outbreaks being targeted. A few months ago we couldn't do that. I mean, when it first arose, we were, it was something that took everybody by surprise. So many of our measures had to be blunt just to get them in place as soon as possible. but we are getting sharper, and we should just continue to work on that.
So in essence, your idea is to basically ring fence, outbreaks as they emerge, say in Melbourne or wherever, and leave the rest of the state open, wherever that is.
Well, that's effectively, yes, to keep our economy going as much as possible.
Yeah.
And not some of these measures are always going to have a level of unfairness, if you like. It's unfair that people are locked up in towers. It's unfair that some suburbs have had to be locked down. But if we can limit that unfairness to where the measures have to be targeted to, that will be better for more people, and it will help our economy. So that's, as I say, I don't want to. I'm not being overly critical here. It's trying to be constructive because all governments are trying to respond to something that's been completely out of the blue. But I do think on the regional travel issues, to help regional economies in particular, that's something that could be looked at.
Well, I know you already said that you don't know the regional areas of Victoria as well as you do in your home state of Queensland, but would you have concerns about, let's say, for example, Albury-Wodonga, right? So you've got the border that basically runs right through the middle of them. So now there's effectively a wall that's being built up. And so there are obvious concerns about people going to hospitals or even farmers trying to move product across state lines. I mean, there was even a story last night I was reading about the horse racing community. You've got these trainers who are in the northern parts of Victoria, and what are they going to do now in terms of getting their horses to race in New South Wales? Things like that. I mean, what are your concerns about those particular areas?
Well, I think we have to take lessons from what the experience we've had, particularly in Queensland, where we do have border towns like those that exist along the Victoria-New South Wales border. The Queensland border was never shut. It wasn't a Berlin Wall. As such, there was always traffic flowing over it.
Yeah.
I went over it a couple of times at Gundawindi. But so we've got to have common sense arrangements in place. Obviously, it will be a level of interruption, inconvenience for people. That's unfortunate, but the idea here is to respond to the risk while trying to allow business to occur, and especially for those people needing healthcare, work arrangements. I'm sure we put in place for that. I noticed that the New South Wales government, despite their criticisms of Queensland over the last few months, have been putting in place plans for such a border closure. There might be some teething issues, I'm sure, but the experience of Queensland was that you can largely work those out. I mean, what you can't limit is there will be impacts on businesses. That's what happened in the Tweed Heads and the Gold Coast. It obviously limits traffic and tourism, incidental travel, etc. But the main thing I think right now is to help people get on with their working lives, get access to health and other important services.
Do you think these court challenges should be thrown out?
Oh, look, I don't begrudge people bringing court action. I do think that the actions that have been brought have largely been done so for publicity purposes, not legal purposes. I'm very much a supporter of states' rights. I think it's absolutely within the right of a state to decide for health or biosecurity reasons restrictions on travel. There obviously have to be good reasons for those. But despite, we can disagree, whether it should have been lifted in June, July or September or what have you, but there's obviously a core health reason here for these restrictions, and I'm pretty confident that would be held up by the High Court.
Okay, just a couple of quick ones before you go, Matt. These comments from Pauline Hanson yesterday, it's resulted in her getting turfed off the Today Show. What are your thoughts on her comments?
Yeah, well, I think they're unnecessarily divisive, and I noticed Pauline's kind of tried to backtrack and apologise for calling people drunks and druggies, or words to that effect. But I fully support our great multicultural society. I'm a product myself, nearly got thrown out for being a second-generation Italian. It's a great country, and the problem with sometimes with One Nation is I think they're chasing the headline rather than dealing with the problem. There is a problem. I think it's very important that our migrants are encouraged and we try to encourage people to learn English as much as possible, and during events like this shows how important a common language, common culture is. But you do not need to generalise and describe people as drug addicted or alcohol ridden. That was completely unnecessary. My heart and sympathies go out to those people. I'd hate to be locked up in a tower like this. Maybe that's the right thing to do right now, but it's a very, very tough circumstance.
Where'd you get thrown out of for being Italian?
I nearly got thrown out of Parliament.
You nearly did. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I'm a proud product of a multicultural Australia. I'm glad I still remain in the Australian Parliament, and hopefully we'll change that archaic constitution.
That's right. Sorry, I thought we were talking about something else then. Yeah. just finally, is John Barrow being made a scapegoat for the loss of Eden Monero on the weekend?
Well, I certainly don't think the coalition, the Liberal candidate, lost because of John Barrow. I'll let others commentate. I think John's always... One thing great about John is he wears his heart in his sleeve. You always know he's telling you what he really thinks, and I think people appreciate that authenticity. I wouldn't support his call to sometimes preference a Labor candidate, but look, he's within all rights to say that. I mean, the reports I've got, we haven't got data yet, so all this speculation, we haven't actually got real figures on what the National Party flow of preferences were at the election. But the anecdotal reports are they were well above 80% flowing to Liberal Party, which is an excellent result and higher than any other preference flows you get from other candidates or parties.
Would you support him next time around?
For John running?
Yeah.
Oh, look, if John was picked by the Nationals, I would support him. I would. I'll be more firm than that. As I say, I can disagree with John on sometimes of what he says, but I got great respect for his representation of his area. The Nationals Party did very well in Queanbeyan at the election in John's patch, and our candidate Trevor Hicks is a former deputy mayor there. Great Queanbeyan locals, and John, what John's achieved there in what was a Labor stronghold of Queanbeyan has been remarkable. He deserves respect for that, and I always love people having a crack rather than sitting back not doing what they should be doing in this game.